It's been almost 2 decades since we started our journey to educate and help you take action so you may better manage your financial future. Our goal is to help you accomplish your life's purpose. This podcast reveals financial tips, strategies, and insights that will help you to set your financial goals and guide you along the way. This is Managing Your Financial Future, brought to you by the advisors at Lucia Capital Group. And welcome back to the podcast, Managing Your Financial Future. I did some checking. Professor Rick Plum is here with me. I'm Johnny Dean, podcast host, not an advisor. Professor Plum, you are an advisor.
I am, have been, and will continue to be for some time.
Yeah, we hope so. Certified financial planner and professional that you are. I just did some checking. This is our last for the season. Season 6. 12 episodes. That's how we do this. 12 episodes. And what a season it's been. I was going over some of the topics that we've talked about. We got some really meaty things going on.
Well, and there's been some things going on in the economy that have been a little interesting as well. A couple of weeks back, there was a couple-day movement that scared some people.
Yeah, gee, volatility in the stock market. Now, who would have thought of that?
Yeah.
Is it possible you ever have volatility? Well, and some things that we might get into in season 7. It's hard to do because I don't really want to talk about monetary policy and all this stuff. But people do get concerned about things like inflation. Why, I don't know, because we really haven't seen much other than spotty inflation here and there. But, little blips don't mean anything. You have to look at it long term.
Although we might get a nice COLA on our Social Security. For those of you receiving Social Security, might get a nice COLA here coming up soon.
You are
next year.
The COLA nut is what you are. That's right.
The uncola.
The uncola.
That's what we've been having.
We've had an uncola for a long time. That's true. We're not promising anything, but
we're not at the end of the measuring period either yet.
No,
but we would have to have a significant decline in the CPI that they use for this, to have a marginal increase for Social Security.
When do they?
October.
October. So we had a month or two where it was higher, but of course we saw that because of the post-COVID. When you have shortages, it's going to cause inflation. So of course you're going to have higher prices, and it shakes itself out.
But they don't take. I mean, that's not taken into consideration. They can't.
No, they don't. They just use the number.
They use the CPI.
They use the number. So it might be nice, which would be good because then the next year is based on this higher number.
Well, and it'll be because Social Security benefits in January will go up.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I don't know what's going to happen is there's another piece of this equation for people that are retired on Social Security that may go up at a much higher clip, and that would be the Medicare premium. We will see how much that Medicare premium goes up and takes away from the cost of living benefit adjustment that the Social Security benefit gets.
Now, I can't remember, but I believe it. You can't have your net benefit cut.
It can't go down.
It can't go down.
But let's for ease of math, you got a $2,000 benefit, and let's say that the benefit in a COLA is going to be 5%. So what's that? $100?
10% is $200, so it's $100.
So you get a $100 increase. Well, you're going to get a $100 increase, but the Medicare. We had a couple in the past where the Medicare increase, the increase went up larger than the cost of living. And a couple of years we had a zero cost of living adjustment on the benefit.
And the Medicare premium still went up.
But if I was getting after my Medicare premium, $1,500 a month, and I didn't get a COLA on my benefit, but I did get an increase on my Medicare premium, my net premium my net benefit that came to me couldn't go down.
So it didn't affect you.
It didn't hurt that much. Or if I only had a very small increase in my Social Security benefit and a large increase in my Medicare premium, it didn't give me less money each month than I had before. But all of that's been caught up, I believe, now. So now we're all trued up, and we'll see. But if we get that big of a COLA on the benefit itself, it's unlikely we're going to have any problems with that hold harmless for the Medicare premium, because it's not going to go up by $100.
Medicare premium is what now, roughly? Do you recall?
$150.
It's about right about 149 something or
149.80.
Well, yeah. So 150. So the
if it's a 10% increase, you get a $15.
So is it starting in October? Would that
no?
also
That's their measuring period.
Oh, so when would they raise the
January.
Medicare premium? So like January 1.
I believe, yes.
Okay. All right. So be looking out for that. Well, that's part of planning. It's part of planning. It does go up pretty much every year, does it not?
We've had only a couple years of zero COLA. We've had a couple of years.
I'm saying the Medicare premium.
Yeah, almost every year it goes up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's been 1 or 2 years where it didn't, but that's unusual.
Have you had time? Have there been? Aren't there certain times where somebody's paying 150, but somebody else is only paying 134?
That has to do with whether or not the increase in the Medicare premium was more than the cost of living adjustment.
Okay, so
because
that's why
if your benefit is only $1,000 a month versus somebody who's got a $3,000 a month premium or benefit, you're more likely going to be hit by the cost of living issue than the other one.
Spouse could have a different one
Yes.
from their other spouse. Interesting stuff. So be looking for that.
Now, if you are subject to IRMA, that hold harmless goes out the window.
Income-related monthly adjustment amount, or
Yes.
IRMAA.
The increased
IRMA.
Medicare premium for people with higher incomes. 86,000 for a single individual, 170 something for
of adjusted gross income.
adjusted gross income.
Yeah. So you get the privilege of paying more.
But you obviously get better care because you're paying more premium. Oh, wait a minute. It doesn't work quite like that.
That joke will never get old, you know?
I don't know why we think that is so funny.
I don't know why either. Well, we should get to the topic at hand here for
yes.
people who have been searching out this particular episode for topics like this. This has to do with something we talked, I don't know when it was, earlier in the year, about the idea of this whole, the 4% rule. And is the 4% rule, guideline, whatever you want to call it, still relevant was what we were talking about. Now, the 4% rule guideline, Professor, explain that very, very quickly.
Well, the idea behind the 4% rule is that if you start your retirement with X amount of dollars in your portfolio, for ease of math, we're just going to start with $1 million because it's really easy to do the math with it.
Yes.
If you take out 4% of that number, $40,000 a year, every year going forward, and you increase it with inflation, you have a statistical 93% chance of the money lasting 30 years. And so they're saying, I think it was actually done on 4.5. So they're saying as long as you stay within about 4% of your original number, you should have enough money to last for 30 years until you're 95. And that covers people's retirement life.
Now, this research was done back in the early to mid-1990s.
The original research.
Research is where that came from. And a fellow by the name of Bill Bengen. I've been saying Bengen all these years.
It's Bengen?
It's Bengen, which I didn't know. But our good buddy Chris Panayiotou, you know him?
I do.
He's one of our advisors in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle area. Tacoma. And he interviewed Mr. Bengen, and I don't even know.
Is he Mr. or Doctor? Maybe he's Mr. I thought he was a
another
doctor.
good question. You know what? I should have listened
not
to
like
his bona
a
fide.
physician type
I should have checked his CV. But he interviewed Bill. We'll call him Bill.
His good friends call him Bill.
I know it's pronounced Bill. Okay, about this on his podcast. You should check it out too, along with ours. Chris Panayiotou, a young advisor out of Seattle. It's called Capitalize, and I believe you can find it on our website as well. So if you want another perspective on investing and some interviews with some
high names, big
high names. Wade Pfau is another one who I'll talk about in just a second. But what Mr. Bengen said on this podcast, what Bill said on this podcast, and I guess it was breaking news, was that he said, he said, I was the author of this, the original author, one of the original people that worked on this 4% rule way back in the early 90s. So it's been 30-something years, almost 30 years. And what he said was that it was 4% then. I think you can take closer to 5 now.
Okay.
Now, he had various reasons for doing so. The reasons don't matter. We're going to get into our reasons for why we talk about it here in a second. But he raised it to, let's say, 5. This is the original developer of this 4% rule guideline. But we've heard other people, including, I think it was Wade Pfau, and I could be incorrect, so don't quote me there. But Wade Pfau or somebody like him, others like him, have said, no.
Given today's interest rates, given the bleaker outlook for the market conditions going forward and things of that nature, 4% is too rich if you want to maintain that 95% or better certainty based on Monte Carlo simulations of returns going forever. And so he said more like 2%.
I've heard 2%. I've heard 2.9. I've heard 1.9. So, in other words, if you had that $1 million,
you should limit your distribution to $20,000 a year.
Oh, please.
Yeah, and so I look at that, and the question is, which one's right? And I think that the 4-5% rule is a useful tool for high-level planning. it can basically give you an idea of your portfolio once you do retirement. And so if you say, look, I need $80,000, you can okay, I need $2 million when I retire.
Because
4% rule says that. Now, how you actually invest that $2 million, $1 million, whatever your nest egg is, to try to create a distributable event of 4%, 5%, whatever the number is that you're trying to achieve, that's where the rubber meets the road. And I think that the reason you have these difference of opinions between 5% and 2% and all that isn't necessarily because the one rule is right and the other one's wrong. I think the whole thing has a flawed methodology behind it. The way they calculate, the way they did their testing is flawed. It's a great way to look at it from an overall view, but when it comes down to practical application and how you actually start making a distribution plan from your portfolio, they did the same thing. They took a balanced portfolio, 60-40, 50-50 stock bond mix, and they rebalanced it, maintained that balance every year.
So they would take a 60-40, let's say, and
they would take $40,000 out of it and then rebalance it.
And then go back to the 60-40.
And it was always maintained at 60-40, going forward, which is a problem when you have down years. Now, if all you have are up years, and
potentially it's going to work great.
If all you have is positive plus years in the market,
all right, I'm just saying.
But we don't have just up years, and we don't have just up months.
So in that fantasy world where it all went up every single year, then it's going to work good.
Right.
But
the reality comes into play where we have down periods of time where, and we have down periods of time that last longer than the one last year. We were down 34% in 33 days, from late February to the beginning of,
S&P,
April 2nd or something, based on the S&P. And then it was back to even 4 months later. Okay, that was, a 5.5 month long bear recovery. That's unheard of up until that point.
Oh.
The typical downturn takes, on average, a year and a half just to get to the bottom.
Yeah.
And then on average, it takes another 4 or 5 years to get back to even where we started from the previous high.
Yeah, and I mean, that depends on what measurement you use.
Basically, we're basing the S&P, and we're just talking about post 29 recoveries and things. So the question is, how much can you forget the $20,000 a year? How much do you need? But how do you set it up so you don't have to worry about that other 5% statistical factor of running out of money that they come up with?
Because it was 95%,
93%,
chance
94%, 95% chance of not running out of money. Well, that means you have a 5, 6, or 7% chance of running out of money, even under their situations. And it's like Mr. Murphy's going to raise his hand and say, I'm going to find that 5% for you. Murphy's Law will dictate a lot of things that happen here.
Are you saying that
it's flawed methodology because they use this balanced portfolio and they take a distribution and they rebalance every year? They don't ever give the market time to actually go through the one thing that we're pretty sure is going to happen, and that's volatility. Whether it's on a daily basis, a weekly, monthly, annual basis, we are going to have volatility. That is almost one of the only truisms we can say for a fact that's in the stock market or in any of the markets out there. So how do we manage that volatility, knowing that we've got to go through this maze and still take a distribution because, frankly, our Social Security is not enough to support our lifestyle and retirement. We've built this portfolio for a reason. We need to use it. And I don't want to have to worry about, oh no, the market's down 30%. I need to spend 30% less money next year.
Yeah.
Or I need to stop spending money until the market recovers. I've heard both of those as options or as planning strategies for the volatility. In retirement, I don't want the market to tell me what I can and cannot do. I want to be able to do what I want to do based on the budget we've set up. Forget what the market does, because the market will not be your friend in the short run. So rather than do a balanced portfolio, that's why we use buckets. We set enough money off to the side in a safer area that isn't affected by the market. And I can draw if I had $1 million, I can draw that $40,000 a year out of this safer account for a series of years to get us past that downturn and that market recovery time horizon. The idea is never put yourself in a position where you have to sell something that could be in a negative position to raise capital cash to spend today for things that you need to or want to do in retirement or for whatever whether it's education or when you have a spending need. You don't want the market to dictate when that spending need happens because we have a life that tells us when we need to make that spending need.
You don't want the market to say, well, you can't pay you have to pick between your water bill and your electric bill.
And even with education, you don't want to say, well, Junior, I know you graduated high school and that, but the market went down 35%, so you're going to have to take a couple years off before you can go into college.
I know we talked about why we do buckets a couple of weeks ago, but this does relate. This does relate again, and it's an important point to make. Now, so it is why you do buckets as an advisor, why you prefer this, because it helps you to potentially manage that volatility.
Well, it takes away the need for anybody to be perfect at predicting what's going to happen over the next several years in the stock market. So I haven't found anybody who can do that yet, for one thing.
So, but you still have to, as an advisor, look at some. I don't want to say
and that's
safe,
like 4 or 5%.
So where does this 2, 3, 4, 5%? Where does this figure in buckets? How do you figure how much to take out?
Well, it depends on how much they actually need. I mean, part of that comes down to the play, too. And so it also depends on age. If you're trying to be an early retiree, you retire at 55, I would not be wanting to use 5 and 6% as a distribution because I'm inviting maybe some troubles down the line, even with buckets. Mm-hmm. Buckets doesn't cure all the ails, everything that may ail you, but it's not. It isn't a guarantee in any way. It's just one of those things. But if I'm 85 when I'm doing this, heck, 5%'s too low. I'm sorry. I don't have to fund 30 years with a retirement at 85. And so it has a lot to do with time horizon. So the earlier that I'm retiring, I've heard people at 50 want to retire. Well, don't be counting on a 6% distribution at age 50.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you may now. That I'm going to say a little bit tongue-in-cheek too, because I can take a little higher distribution for the next 15 years or so, and then not give myself the CPI increases when Social Security kicks in, because Social Security will kick in, so I can keep it more flat rather than doing that CPI adjustment every year.
Which is why the whole question of is 4% too little or 5% too much or 2% too little, which is why I think you're saying, which is why that's kind of a bogus thing, because
it's a guideline, but it's a great way to start, but it shouldn't rule your life.
Yeah, because maybe there's somebody who wants to retire at 60, but they're going
to wait until 70 to take their Social Security.
Right, and they'll have a pretty good pension coming in, but they want to wait till 65 for that, and then they'll have Medicare.
Well, what I do with that kind of planning is we do the strategy, we figure out how much money goes into bucket 1, 2, 3, and all that, and then we layer in the income, and then I look at age 70 based on projections of what we think we're going to earn. What is my distribution at 70 once everything is kicked in? Am I still at a 15% distribution? That may not work. But if once everything kicks in, I'm at a 4 or 5% distribution at 70, this is and assuming my assumptions on return for the buckets aren't like, oh, I think I can earn 45% a year. Be realistic on some of the. And so when we look into the future, and we project and we say, is this a viable alternative? And we look at what that distribution pattern may look like at age 70, 75. And if it's within tolerance based on all this.
So you maybe, just to throw out an example, maybe you're saying this, maybe somebody could take a 7%.
I've seen higher than that for a couple of years. I mean, somebody retiring at 65, they don't want to take their Social Security until 70. And, I've seen them taking 8, 9, 10% for 5 years. But then things kick in, and they need almost nothing from the portfolio once all these other assets and other incomes kick in. They may be not only may they be postponing their Social Security, but maybe they only have 5 years left on their mortgage, and their mortgage is a couple grand a month. And then so the mortgage drops off. That means they don't need a distribution from the portfolio to continue to pay for that mortgage. And their Social Security kicks in. They don't need the big distribution from the portfolio because the Social Security is covering it now. So they front load their portfolios a lot. I've seen that quite often where things happen. And the idea also that CPI has to be adjusted every year. I've been doing this.
In other words, I'm sorry. You give yourself a. Give yourself a raise.
I started off at 40,000, and CPI this year was 5.3%. So I'm going to increase my 40,000 by 5.3%. And next year it's 2.6. And that every year I'm going to raise it by exactly what the government tells me CPI is. Well, frankly, my spending and my budget has never worked in lockstep with what the CPI says. There have been years where my expenditures went up a lot faster than what the CPI said they should have. Maybe that's because we were paying for school and other things.
Or went slower.
Or it goes slower. And what we find is that as people age through their retirement, yes, the CPI affects them in the early years, 60 to 70, 75 maybe. But as they get in their late 70s, 80s, 90s, yes, CPI does affect what they're buying. What they're paying for costs more than it used to cost. They're just not buying as many units of whatever it was. I mean, you can't get them to go shopping for new clothes. Their styles are actually coming back.
Yeah, we've talked about this before as well.
But
it's
people
just
tend to slow down the spending with the exception of healthcare.
Yeah, and oftentimes...
And who knows what that's going to be.
Where do you see a big spike in healthcare spending toward the last couple years of life? Is that how that works?
Yeah, because it's rare that it's a continuous, unless you are chronic and it's 65, then it's going to be an issue. But most people don't have that until the latter part of their life, and then it gets expensive. But for the most part, I've seen people that just their distribution from their portfolio stays relatively flat for 10, 15 years or more. Because, when we have our reviews with people, they're like, we're actually building up a little bit in the checking account or the savings account. We make sure we do the required minimum distributions, but I don't need any other money.
Well, what I like about that, too, is that if I realize that for maybe just a limited period of time, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, if I can take more than that rigid 4%. Maybe
it's
I can
not
take
a
8
rigid
or 9.
number.
Yeah, maybe I can retire sooner than I thought.
Before my full Social Security kicks in.
Right. Maybe I can retire instead of age 67 when my full benefit, or my age 70. Maybe I want to retire at 65 and take.
But I still want to delay taking my social for a while.
I still want to delay because once this age kicks in, and I'll have those guaranteed payments coming in.
Right. I think that this is not a rule. It is not a hard, cold, fast, got to live by 4%, 5%. He doesn't even have an exact number. The gentleman who created this rule. It's a guideline, but it's only a guideline as an overall picture, not on an annual basis. You can take a little more sometimes if you're going to take a little less later. Or you take a little less now, take a little more later.
But it is good to have a range. Do you generally, where do people...
We typically start in the 4.5% range. And then we adjust from there. But again, that's assuming all the incomes have turned on already. And so for somebody who is not turning on their income right away when they retire, then we back into how much we can afford to take, and we project into the future to see what the distribution looks like once all the incomes have kicked in.
This, to me, would be very hard to do on your own.
It's just a matter of math. I know, another 4-letter word.
Exactly. Math. Well, it's not just math, but you have to take into account things that are coming up. You should figure on a little bit of inflation, but you've got to take into account things like required minimum distributions that some people don't know about or forget about. They forget to include those things. What happens if a spouse passes away and you wind up, because your Social Security benefits are...
Well, one of them is lost.
You may lose up to half of your
could lose
Social
half
Security
of your overall income.
How do you plan for stuff like that? I mean, this all goes into a retirement plan, right?
It does. And so we're looking at it as, okay, and that's why one of the first things we talk about is how to set up your Social Security. When do you take it? When does your spouse take it? And how do we maximize it, not only for your own joint lives, but for a survivor going forward, depending upon the age difference, the health difference, things of that nature, and a projected life expectancy. Unfortunately, it is something that we don't know. I hope you don't know what your actual life expectancy is. But you might have a good idea from family history, your history, and things like that. What are we going to bet on for Social Security? But we're going to look at it not just for the joint life, but also for a survivor issue. And then what happens when there's a survivor issue? Where's the money going to come from? How much money does that survivor need? Mm-hmm. And that goes into, if you have a pension, which pension option do you select? Do you take the life only because your survivor just doesn't need? A, you're expected to, significantly outlive the spouse, and B, even if it didn't, outlive them, they don't need your pension anyway. And so, or no, that pension is a big chunk of what's going on. We need to protect that pension. So you either need to buy life insurance protected or take the survivor option if you're unhealthy enough that you can't get life insurance. Social Security first, pension planning second. Now we've got those numbers. We know what to expect from those areas. What do you need to spend? Now, the first couple of years of retirement are difficult because it's a transition. And we really don't know what we're going to do in retirement until we get to retirement. We have an idea, but I'm a little afraid of when I actually retire because while I'm at work, I'm not spending money.
Because you're at work.
Because I'm at work, yeah. And when I'm at home,
when every day's a weekend.
I unfortunately my hobbies are not free.
Yeah, you said that last time. I think.
And it does worry me as I get older. I'm thinking, what am I?
You could just say no.
Oh, come on. Do you know me?
There is that option, Professor Plum. Yes, I know you.
Have you been introduced to who I am? And
yes, I have. And, people can change.
I'm thinking about taking a road trip this year and having a destination on the other side of the U.S. And not having a plan of how to get there.
Oh, that sounds like fun, though.
And
that does sound like fun.
And doing maybe Route 66 and stopping at every cheese ball of yarn, world's
largest ball of yarn
or whatever it is.
House of Mud.
And checking out the weird sites.
Cousin Eddie in Kansas.
Is that a place? I don't
know. But you can visit your Cousin Eddie in Kansas.
No, he'll just want money.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm just going back to the movie Vacation. But,
okay, I'm sorry. I missed that.
Okay. But things like that are also...
but that's expensive because I got to stay somewhere and I don't have anything planned out, so I'm getting it last minute. Luckily, you can get some of these cheap deals online. I did a cross-country trip earlier this year, and I would walk into a hotel and ask what the rate was, and they say, if you go online, you can get a better rate. I had to go through some outsourced online,
standing in the lobby,
and then show him the thing, and he could give me a better rate from an online site than I could get from him just standing right there, or her right there.
Well, you said you're going to do that this year?
I'm thinking about it.
Huh. Interesting.
I haven't actually.
We're doing that. Not we have destinations, but we are doing that ourselves.
Well, I have an ultimate destination, but I don't have a time frame, because unfortunately my daughter and her family moved cross country, so I do want to.
They're in West by God, Virginia.
Yeah, and she sends me pictures every day, and my little 2-year-old grandson is out there in nature, hiking, going through rivers and creeks, and picking up bugs, and just checking out everything. And he's outdoors every day. It's awesome.
So you will say, well, I'll be there when I get there.
I'll spend 4 or 5 days with them as long as they can stand me.
But you might not. It might take you 2 weeks to get there.
I don't think I'll take 2 weeks because I don't have that much time. I can be away from the office.
You do have a job still.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I mean.
You're still working.
But I can work a lot on the road, too.
Well, see, we're kind of doing that myself, my wife and I, because she has the time, and I'm in the same position.
Gas it's not cheap. Lodging's not cheap. That would be eating, at restaurants and things, which isn't cheap. I mean, that would be expensive.
Well, I don't have the gasoline problem. We have
electric,
so that's not an issue. That's paid for. That's another good thing about that. But yeah, I mean, every day that it extends, it's another hotel, or you got to stay somewhere, and it's food and all that. But it just sounds like so much fun.
It does, and not knowing exactly where I'm going to be going, and just saying, you know what? That's because my wife and I did this a couple of years back when we went to Yellowstone. We drove there, but we gave ourselves time to get there. It was there's a sign for an ice cave in southern Idaho.
It's 14 miles
on this dirt road.
Whatever,
it's like, what's an ice cave?
Let's find out.
Let's go.
Yeah.
It was so cool. Not just because it was an ice cave either.
Yeah, sure. I get it. That can be dangerous because you're going to get to like it.
Yeah.
You're going to, at some point, say,
and work's going to become a bigger 4-letter word.
I've got to get back to the office for something. This doesn't sound nearly as much fun. But anyway, well, this is all. That's why you. But that's why you plan.
Yeah.
That's why you strategize.
And that's why the first couple of years of retirement are somewhat of a transition. But after the first couple of years,
get it out of your system.
Well, you kind of get into a flow of it. And you feel more about it, and you know what your budget is. And people tend to get into their retirement based on what their budget is.
So the idea should have been for me to be totally and completely independently wealthy.
Of course.
At this age. That was somewhere in my plan. I just never did anything that, allowed it to happen.
I remember back in the 80s, I was new in the business, and I was at a group of people, a networking group, and there was a new chiropractor, and they were 27 or 28 years old, and they wanted to retire when they were 35. And I'm like,
35?
They said that was old to them. It was like, And how do you expect to do this? You're going to try to save enough money in the next 7 or 8 years to last you 50 years. And you've got school debt from becoming a doctor. I mean, they didn't like me after that.
I have a feeling this chiropractor was pulling your leg. Chiropractor jokes. If there's a bad one out there, I haven't heard it.
I just said they were all cracked up.
Okay, well, mine was probably a little better. I'm kidding, of course. Listen, folks, you want to learn about retirement, you want to plan for retirement, you need to have a strategy. This is why we talk about this stuff. 4%, 5%, 2%. Who knows what your percentage is? It's all going to depend on your individual circumstances. And as I said, you may be able to retire before you thought. I've been saying that for a couple of years now, and that just sounds so much. Every time I say that.
And I know one person who actually listened to you and did it. Your wife.
My wife. She's bragging the other day, is tomorrow Monday? I didn't know that. Bang, Zoom.
Yeah, off to work you go, John.
Exactly. So I said, yeah, okay, well, I can tell you tomorrow's Monday. But anyway, now good for her. Good for her. And with the amount of work she's put in over the last 30 plus years, she deserves it. And the only trouble is I start to think, well, gee, I put in some work over the last 30 years. That sure looks like a fun, here I am I'm on the outside looking in or the inside looking out, however you want to do it. But listen, it's all about planning and retirement. Talk to Professor Plum or any of the Lucia Capital Group advisors. That's the point. 800-644-1150, 800-644-1150. You can go online as well, luciacap.com. Send us an email, talk to us, ask us your questions. We'd love to get a question from you, retirement related, whatever it is, Social Security, we can answer it here on this program. Lucia Cap, LuciaCap.com. Also, get more of this podcast. This is the last show of this season. We'll be off for a couple of weeks, but you can go to Spotify. If you haven't already, you can get it on our website, but subscribe, download the podcast, listen to all of our content. We've had many, many shows. Spotify will do that for you. This has been fun. Now, we're going to be back in a few weeks, probably about 3 weeks, something like that. 2-3 weeks. Take a little break in between seasons. But if you have anything else, folks, that you want us to talk about, things that you feel are important for us to bring up, it doesn't matter what it is, shoot us an email. Say, hey, listen, I've got this situation. Can you please help clear this up? Because I've never heard this anywhere else. We'd love to talk about that as well. For Professor Rick Plum, Certified Financial Planner, I'm your podcast host, Johnny Dean. Thanks so much for listening today and through the entire Season 6. And we will talk to you again next time as we continue to manage your financial future.
The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. To the extent that this material concerns tax matters, it is not intended or written to be used and cannot be used by a taxpayer for the purpose of avoiding penalties that may be imposed by law. Each taxpayer should seek independent advice from a tax professional based on his or her individual circumstances. Different types of investments and or investment strategies involve varying levels of risk, and there can be no assurance that any specific investment or investment strategy, including the investments purchased and or investment strategies devised by LCG, will either be suitable or profitable for a client's or prospective client's portfolio. Thus, investments may result in a loss of principal. Accordingly, no client or prospective client should assume that the presentation or any component thereof serves as the receipt of or a substitute for personalized advice from LCG or from any other investment professional. You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. This material was gathered from sources believed to be reliable. However, its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. The information provided is based on current laws, which are subject to change at any time. Lucia Capital Group is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency. Social Security rules can be complex. For more information about Social Security benefits, visit the SSA website at ssa.gov or call 800-772-1213 to speak with an SSA representative. S&P 500 Index is an unmanaged index and includes a representative sample of large-cap U.S. companies in leading industries. An investment may not be made directly in an index. It is important to keep in mind that investments in fixed income products are subject to liquidity or market risk, interest rate risk. Bonds ordinarily decline in price when interest rates rise and rise in price when interest rates fall. Financial or credit risk, inflation or purchasing power risk, and special tax liabilities. Interest may be subject to the alternative minimum tax. Treasury securities are backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, but are subject to inflation risk. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There is no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated. IRA withdrawals will be taxed at ordinary income rates. Withdrawals prior to age 59.5 may also be subject to a 10% penalty tax. Insurance services offered through LPL Financial or its licensed affiliates. California Insurance License Number 0518721. Rick Plum and Chris Panayiotou are registered registered representatives with, and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Lucia Capital Group, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Bill Bengen and Wade Pfau are not affiliated with Lucia Capital Group nor LPL Financial.